again, and welcome to SFF180. Thomas here, your host as always, and it is time, slightly delayed, I'm sorry, but it is now time for my list of 2024 most anticipated horror books. And if you are a horror fan, this upcoming year has an embarrassment of riches waiting for you. This is my biggest list ever, 40 titles. And even then, I had to really pare a lot of stuff back, take some things out that I didn't want to have to take out. But it's coming, and it's a big year. So without any further delay, we're going to get right into it. I learned my lesson from the science fiction episode that just came out because my throat got so parched from recording that for so long in all those books. So I have, in addition to all my water, I've brought this to cool my throat. And if you think that this isn't a very horror thing to be doing, eating ice cream, well, then that just tells me you have not seen Clint Howard in The Ice Cream Man. Your 80s classics, all right? So, remember, every book release date is subject to change without notice. And, yeah, that's it. Let's get into it. Scary Reads, horror books for 2024. Starting January the 9th, we get The Jinn Waits 100 Years. This is a book by a South African author named Shubnam Khan. And this is part of the current trend in Gothic fiction, I guess you could say, you know, following on from Mexican Gothic and many others in that vein. It takes place in a once lavish, but now abandoned and ruined estate off the coast of South Africa. Sana is a woman drawn to the place, where she discovers the old diary of a girl named Mina that compels her to dig into the past and unravel the secrets of Mina's life. But Sana is unaware that she is being observed by a grieving jinn that has haunted the estate since Mina's death. And so I'm sure some of these dark secrets will be unraveled. All right. Next up, January the 16th has 2 titles, starting with The Parliament. This is in from Tor.com Publishing. The author is Amy Pawatka. And this is kind of a variant on Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, you might say. If you've ever sat awake late at night saying to yourself, boy, why hasn't somebody written a horror novel all about, murderous owls? Well, your prayers have been answered, because this is the murder owl horror story you've been waiting for. Madigan Purdy is a small-town librarian who is trapped in the library with a group of students when hundreds of murderous owls surround the place. Perhaps the solution to her dilemma rests in a children's storybook. Okay, well, first off, I can think of worse place to be stranded, but I think that I could find a solution to this situation pretty easily. What I would do is I would get on the phone, I would call up the local chapter of Moms for Liberty, and I would say, oh no, Moms for Liberty, you have to get down to the library right away. The librarian just tried to check out a book to a kid, and it has gay characters in it. Hurry! And then all the Karens would show up, and the owls would massacre them, while the students and I slipped out the back. See? Easy. Solve 2 problems at once. All right, but that's probably not the solution that happens in the book. So to read what really happens, The Parliament will be out on January 16th. Also on January 16th, this one looks really fascinating. A book called This Wretched Valley. The author is Jenny Kiefer. And this is inspired by the notorious Dyatlov Pass incident. Jenny Kiefer's wilderness horror begins when a young woman named Dylan, hoping for Instagram fame, decides to climb a never-before-scaled cliff face in the Kentucky wilderness. 7 months later, everyone's mangled skeletal remains are found, except there is no trace of Dylan. So, find out what happens on the 16th, This Wretched Valley. Moving ahead to February the 6th, 2 more titles out that day. First is Among the Living by Tim Leben. Now, we can never have enough polar horror, and veteran Tim Leben's new one is set on a remote Arctic island where our protagonists are Dean and Bethan, 2 ideological foes who must team up to journey to a remote cave where the extraction of rare natural resources by Dean's company has released a terrifying contagion that must now be stopped before it spreads to the world at large. And also on the 6th, from Nightfire, this is a book called Your Shadow Half Remains by Sunny Moraine, pitched as The Last of Us meets Bird Box. It's a post-apocalyptic story in which eye contact causes people to fly into a murderous rage. Okay, now this already happens on Texas freeways, but I suspect this story deals deeper with the theme of forced social isolation. On the 13th of February, T. Kingfisher returns With What Feasts at Night. Now, this is a follow-up to What Moves the Dead, but I think it is another standalone book. Retired soldier Alex Easton returns to their family lodge in their home country of Galatia, only to find the caretaker dead, the lodge in disarray, and the grounds troubled by a strange, uncanny silence. The villagers are whispering that a breath-stealing monster from folklore has taken up residence in Easton's home. And on the 20th of February, we get a book called The Bad Ones by Melissa Albert. I don't usually, as I say, cover too much YA on these lists, but this one looked interesting. In the course of a single winter's night, 4 people vanish without a trace across a small town, including Nora's estranged best friend, Becca. As Nora tries to untangle the truth of Becca's disappearance, she discovers a darkness in her town's past, as well as a string of coded messages Becca left for her to unravel. And I suppose we'll find out why Becca bothered to code them in the first place, but it does seem like a really interesting premise. Moving on. Small press is where it's at in horror, and this is a book from Raw Dog Screaming Press. It's a new novella by Tim McGregor called Einhallow, and it is a retelling of Frankenstein, set on the Orkney Islands in 1797 and told from the viewpoint of Agnes Tulloch, a woman hired out by her husband to work as a domestic for a mysterious and mercurial foreigner who has come to their island and aroused the curiosity of the locals. Agnes knows he's a scientist of some kind, but she has no idea what he is up to, toiling in his basement every night. March the 5th brings us 2 more titles. This first one in from Saga Press, the new book by Gwendolyn Kist. It's The Haunting of Velkwood, a suburban ghost story about a woman who is persuaded by a paranormal researcher to return to her childhood neighborhood to find answers to the inexplicable occurrence that killed nearly everyone there except for 3 who escaped. And of course our heroine is one of those. After which the entire neighborhood disappeared behind a veil that only those survivors can re-enter. And also on the 5th, The Invisible Hotel. The author is Yeji Y. Ham, and it's a Gothic-flavored tale of generational trauma examining the long-term societal impact of the Korean War. Yi-won is a young woman trapped in a small South Korean town's dead-end life, who has recurring dreams of a hotel where there are infinite keys to infinite rooms, and a quiet terror she is desperate to escape. When her brother is stationed near the border between North and South Korea, and news comes in that the North is breaking armistice, Yi-won's dreams begin seeping into her reality. All right, moving on to March the 19th. It is a busy day with 3 releases coming out, starting with this one from Titan Books, A Botanical Daughter. The author is Noah Medlock, and it is another Frankenstein-inspired Victorian body horror in which a couple of eccentric young gentlemen, Simon and Gregor, whose interests include taxidermy and exotic plants, discover a fungus that appears to show evidence of sapient intelligence. So, naturally, this being Victorian England, Gregor decides a little body snatching is needed to provide the plant with a human cadaver as a growth medium. And as you can assume, that is going to turn out just absolutely freaking great, isn't it? So, that will be out on the 19th, as well as Forgotten Sisters, the new book by Cynthia Palaio. And this is a new Chicago-set novel, as many of her books are set, of psychological horror about 2 sisters living in an historic bungalow along the Chicago River that is their family home, which may very well be super haunted, in addition to the higher-than-average number of corpses that float by on the river. Now, that is not the kind of thing that would escape the notice of even the Chicago police for very long, and as the investigation progresses, the sisters discover the truth is more dreadful than they imagined. And finally, on the 19th, we get the new book by Lee Mandello, The Woods All Black. This is equal parts historical horror, trans romance, and blood-soaked revenge. In the 1920s, Great War veteran Leslie Bruin is assigned to an isolated Appalachian town by the Frontier Nursing Service, where he discovers the local congregation is menacing a young person they insist is an unruly tomboy who must be brought to heel. Violence is ready to spill over, and he'll have to act fast if he intends to be of use. But the surrounding hills have a mind of their own, and the woods are haunted in ways Leslie does not understand. 2 releases on March 26th, starting with my personal most anticipated release of next year, The Angel of Indian Lake, concludes Stephen Graham Jones's Indian Lake trilogy. And this is probably, the most lauded trilogy in the history of literary horror. And it picks up 4 years after Don't Fear the Reaper, as Jade Daniels returns to Proof Rock, Idaho to build a life after the years of sacrifice, only to find the Lake Witch is waiting for her. So we're going to get the final girl, final girl, final girl situation here in this one. Very much looking forward to it. Also on March 26th, the new book by Jennifer Thorne, Diavola, comes out from Nightfire. Thorne was the author of a folk horror novel called Loot, which I reviewed here. I thought it was pretty good. You know, a very good, I think, promising debut, and so I'm interested in seeing what she does with this one, which focuses on the unique horror of family vacations. Being trapped in an unfamiliar locale with people that you often can barely tolerate. I think we've all been there once or twice. The Pace family is more than a little dysfunctional, but they go off together to spend holiday time in a villa in a remote Italian town. And wouldn't you know it, villa's haunted. Thorne is really good with family dynamic stuff, so I'm sure that's going to play a big role here. Moving on to April the 9th. 2 more titles, and the first one again from Nightfire, Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. Yes, I love deep space horror. I want to see somebody pull it off well. And you might be surprised to see this book on my list for this year, because if you have been following my channel for a while, then you know my review of Dead Silence. I was very disappointed in that book. I thought it was a complete botch job, but I have never been the kind of reader who just like is a one and done, except in rare cases. You know, if I'm disappointed in something, I am still ready to be open-minded about future works, other works from that writer, you know, because everybody has, you know, well, you don't like this one, maybe this other one will work. So I want to give this one a try, and I want this to be awesome. Psychologist Dr. Ophelia Bray has dedicated her life to the study and prevention of ERS, a space-based condition most famous for a case that resulted in the brutal murders of 29 people. When she's assigned to a small exploration crew, she's eager to make a difference. But as they begin to establish residency on an abandoned planet, it becomes clear that the crew is hiding something. Also on the 9th from Titan Books, Myrrh by Polly Hall. This one looks fascinating. A woman searching for her birth parents unlocks the secrets of her horrific past as she tries to stop the goblin within in this kaleidoscopic dark psychological horror about identity and belonging, with a dread-inducing climax you will never forget. And it is perfect, they say, for fans of Eric LaRocca, Daphne du Maurier, and Katrina Ward. Moving on to April 16th, another big day, 3 titles, starting with Immortal Pleasures. This is the new novel by V. Castro. Now this one, I have to admit, it sounds a bit more like paranormal romance, which I would ordinarily not touch with a 10-foot pole, but I admit I am very intrigued by the premise of a vampire who is a resurrected Aztec woman, avenging her people by traveling the world, stealing back all their plundered artifacts. So I'm willing to check that out. Also on the 16th, the new book by Nick Medina, Native American writer, and this is Indian Burial Ground. A man lunges in front of a car. An elderly woman silently drowns herself. A corpse sits up in its coffin and speaks. On this reservation, not all is what it seems in this new spine-chilling mythological horror from the author of Sisters of the Lost Nation. And finally, on the 16th, from Nightfire, the new novel by Thomas Oldehoyevelt. The author of Hex brings us Oracle, a supernatural thriller where an omen from our past threatens the return of ancient forces that will change the world forever. On a foggy winter morning, a young woman enters the wreckage of an 18th century sailing ship, stranded in a field, and is never seen again. When Robert Grimm, a retired occult specialist, is called in to unravel the mystery, the Oracle is revealed to be a harbinger of an ancient doom awakened underneath the sea. Now, moving ahead to April the 23rd. The Day of the Doors, the new book by Laurel Hightower from Ghoulish Books, the new novel by the author of Crossroads and Below, in which 3 grieving siblings confront their manipulative mother after learning of her participation in a popular paranormal television show designed to dramatize the most traumatic day of their childhood. Pitched as The Haunting of Hill House meets A Head Full of Ghosts. Yeah, wow. Mom would have to be a major asshole to do that to her kids. And then also on the 23rd, The Redemption of Morgan Bright is the new novel by Chris Panettiere from Angry Robot Books, the author of The Phlebotomist, a new psychological horror. In the wake of the tragic unsolved death of a woman as she was leaving the mental hospital Hollyhock Asylum, the victim's sister checks herself into this facility under a false identity. I don't know, I would question the wisdom of that choice, but anyway, she gets in there only to find her false persona growing stronger in her mind as her search for answers reveals that there is definitely something not right about Hollyhock Asylum. Of course, the place is called Hollyhock Asylum. I suppose horror characters are just going to have to live and learn. Anyway, moving on to May the 14th, two more titles, starting with a new one by Christina Henry. This is called The House That Horror Built. And it seems like it's, a bit more of kind of a self-referential, fun kind of a scary story. At least from her, anyway. It's about a single mother who takes a housekeeping job in the forbidding Greystone Chicago mansion of a renowned horror film director she has long been a fan of. But when she thinks she hears the sound of someone calling for help behind a locked door, she begins to suspect the sinister house holds some secrets she cannot ignore. And then also on May the 14th, we see the release of My Darling Dreadful Thing. The author is Johanna Van Veen, and this is described as a sapphic gothic ghost story about Ruth, a young woman with a spirit companion named Ruth that only she can see. Now, Ruth falls for and moves in with a wealthy young widow she met at a seance, but when their new life is shattered by murder, and Ruth is the prime suspect, how can she convince the police psychologist that a jealous spirit actually did the deed? So May the 21st has been set aside for You Like It Darker, the new short story collection by Stephen King. I guess nobody wants to compete with Steve. But yeah, I'm excited about this because I think Stephen King's track record of quality in short form, really, I think it's as strong, if not even stronger, than his track record in novels, to be honest with you. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of his most famous, enduring stories were novelettes, novellas, even short stories, right? I mean, The Body, Shawshank Redemption was a novella, Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption, and The Mist, again, another novella. So yeah, he does really well in short form, and so I'm very much looking forward to this. And yeah, so let's hope this new set drops several new classics, shall we? I know that one of the stories is a confirmed sequel to Cujo. So moving on to June the 4th. We get the new book by Ronald Malfi, Small Town Horror. Ronald Malfi is an author, I think, who at his best is every bit King's equal. But, even though I think his popularity has grown over the last few years, he's not at that bestseller stardom where he deserves to be. But, hopefully that'll come. But anyway, Small Town Horrors follows the tried-and-true nostalgia horror template of 5 childhood friends who are forced to confront their own dark past as well as the curse placed upon them. And then, also, on the 4th, we get something quite a bit different. This book is called Youth Juice by E.K. Sathue, or Sathu, perhaps, I don't know. But this is a gruesome satirical horror debut about beauty standards and the industry that shapes them. I guess in a similar vein to this year's book, Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. An ambitious New York career woman joins the team at an ultra-trendy Soho skincare and wellness company, where, among other things, she is asked to test their new moisturizer. Yeah, and I guess it gets more horrifying from there. It's described as The Devil Meets Prada mashed up with American Psycho. It's a story that vigorously shreds beauty influencer culture by an author with first-hand experience in it. Okay, then. So I suspect a whole lot of tea spilling going on in this book. All right. On June the 18th, Craig DeLuey returns with How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. Now, this is going to be another example of metafictional horror like episode 13. That was about the ghost hunter show that went wrong. And this one is a darkly humorous horror novel that sees a famous 80s slasher director set out to shoot the most terrifying horror movie ever made using an occult camera that might be, and probably is, demonic. And back to body horror. For June the 25th, we have a book called The Eyes Are the Best Part. The author is Monica Kim. Ji-won is a Korean-American woman who's starting to crack up as her family life and college are falling apart all around her, and her boyfriend is revealing himself to be a selfish, condescending douchebag. I wrote that, not the publicist. In her dreams, Ji-won walks through bloody rooms full of eyes, succulent blue eyes, salivatingly blue eyes. Yes, I get the pattern. No matter how many victims accumulate around her campus or how many people she must deceive and manipulate, Ji-won's hunger and her rage Deserve to be sated. Okay then. Wow. And also on June the 25th, the new book by Paul Tremblay, horror movie. It's from the author of The Cabin at the End of the World and Survivor Song, of course. And he returns with a variation on the cursed film premise, in which a Hollywood studio greenlights a remake of an early 90s zero-budget horror film that has developed a cult following over years, despite, or more likely because of, the fact it was never finished, and only 3 of its scenes were ever released. July opens with 2 releases on the 2nd, starting with Midnight Rooms. The author is Donier Coles, and this is, again, another debut Gothic novel, in the vein of Crimson Peak, set in 1840 England, in which Arabella, a mixed-race woman of little to no social standing, is unexpectedly approached by a scruffy-looking man who nonetheless claims to be the scion of a wealthy family, and asks for her hand in marriage. Arabella consents both out of curiosity and a desire to help settle her uncle's debts, but once she settles in at her new husband's family home, well, I guess Gothic novel things start happening, right? So I'm hoping this one has a very fun, spooky atmosphere to carry it. Now, this is going to be one of those, as in my science fiction video, I had a couple books like this, so take it as highly, highly tentative. But it is the new book by Grady Hendrix, called Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. You know, the author of We Sold Our Souls, How to Sell a Haunted House, right? He's big news. But this is interesting because there's very little info about it yet. The July 2nd release only is coming from UK stores, again, so it's Pan Macmillan in the UK has it listed, but they don't have a cover up yet, just like with the Hanu Rayaniemi novel from my SF episode. And there's very little in the way of a plot synopsis, and again, there is no announcement of any kind from, I guess, Del Rey is now Grady Hendrix's publisher here in the States, so there's been no U.S. announcement. But, well, whatever, we'll find out. My most extensive internet sleuthing has found short blurbs calling it both folk horror and a feminist horror story set in a maternity home in the 1970s. Hopefully we will find out more soon. July the 9th is the next book by Chuck Tingle, who made a big impact this year with Camp Damascus. His new book is Bury Your Gaze, and this is a trenchant satire of Hollywood. Misha's hard work as a Hollywood screenwriter has paid off at last with an Oscar nomination. But when the executives at the streaming service hosting his long-running show tell him to kill off all the gay characters in the season finale for the sake of the algorithm, Misha refuses. He soon realizes that he's just put a target on his back, and what's worse, monsters from his horror movie days are stalking him and his friends through the hills above L.A. Moving on to July 16th. If one Stephen Graham Jones horror novel for a single year is not enough, well, let's have 2. How about that? I Was a Teenage Slasher. It's his second book for 2024, and it continues to explore Stephen's fondness for classic slashers, and this story is set in a small Texas town in 1989, where a teenage boy named Tolly, who's not a bad kid, ends up killing out of revenge, all while journaling the tragic turn his life has taken. So it is the killer story from the point of view of the killer and his internal thoughts. Now, on July 30th, this one looks terrific. Stay on the Line, by Clay McLeod Chapman and Trevor Henderson. This one literally came in under the wire, you guys. Like, as I was, in the old days of newspapers, they would say, stop the presses. I was literally putting together the final list for this video, and then this came up, and I'm like, I can't leave it out. It is the author of Ghost Eaters and What Kind of Mother, of course, collaborating with the popular horror illustrator Trevor Henderson, who created Siren Head and some other great internet monsters. It's a novella set in a small coastal town that has been devastated by a hurricane, after which the survivors gravitate toward a long out-of-service payphone in hopes of talking out their grief and saying goodbye to loved ones, only for it to begin ringing on its own. As more townspeople answer the call, friends and family believed to have been lost to the storm begin searching for a way back home. Moving into August now, August the 6th sees the release of A Mask of Flies by Matthew Lyons. This comes in from Nightfire. In this crime horror epic, a career criminal named Anne and her partner Jessup flee a botched bank job, with Dutch, a cop, for a hostage hiding out in Anne's family's secluded Colorado cabin. Now, when Jessup dies of his wounds and they bury him, he comes back that night. Anne is about to learn some things about her childhood at the cabin and the strange relics of her mother's that she has found there. Okay, full disclosure, I'm currently reading Matthew Lyon's previous book to this one. Not thinking too much of it, I have to be honest. But as I said before, with Ghost Station, I will always give another shot, right? So, A Mask of Flies will be out on August the 6th. Getting towards the end of the list here, on August the 20th, another one, I believe, from Nightfire. This is called Sacrificial Animals. The author is Kaylee Peterson, and this is an atmospheric supernatural horror story of generational trauma inspired by the author's own experience of being adopted from China. That also explores ancient Chinese mythology. Nick and Joshua Morrow are summoned to their estranged father's deathbed. Along for the trip is Joshua's Asian wife, Emily, whom he was disowned for marrying. Now, Joshua and their father do begin a reconciliation, and Nick finds himself drawn into an affair with Emily, only to discover she may have sinister and possibly even ancient motivations. I'm going to say the situation does not look very good for the boys. Now, moving on to August the 27th. This one looks fantastic. It is a new novella by Nathan Ballingrud, Crypt of the Moon Spider. Absolutely spectacular title. The author of The Strange and Wounds returns with this novella that is the first in the Lunar Gothic trilogy. And like The Strange, it creates a planetary romance-inspired alternate history for its setting. It is 1923, and Veronica has landed on our lush and forested moon to undergo treatment for melancholy at a famous sanitarium there, a treatment which involves installing lunar spider silk into various parts of her brain. And this procedure apparently comes with consequences. Well then, who would have thought? September the 3rd. Now this one looks fascinating to me. I cannot actually wait for this. It is a book called The Night Guest. The author is Hildur Knutsdottir, and it is an Icelandic psychological horror translated by none other than Mary Robinette Kowal. Ithun, a woman with chronic fatigue syndrome that doctors have failed to be able to treat, wears her smartwatch to bed one night, only to discover she has walked over 40,000 steps in her sleep. She sets up her phone camera to record what she does during all of this, and what she discovers sets up a terrifying chain of events. Okay, so you put something like that in a nice bleak place like Iceland, and it is just a recipe for horror awesomeness, I'm quite sure. And now we are going to wrap up this list with, you guessed it, Haley Piper. Our girl Haley has 4 books, four coming out in 2024. Thank you, Haley. You know, actually 4 books makes this kind of a slow year for her. But I had to kind of like pick which one to do, right? So even though one of them already has a cover out, I'm going with All the Hearts You Can Eat, which is out on October the 15th, and it is the second novel in her Titan Books contract. You know, the first one being A Light Most Hateful. This one is described as a monstrous vampire novel about a dead girl, a haunted coast, an ancient curse, and a thirst for blood. It is a cornucopia in 2024, if you're a Haley fan. So, that is going to do it. So, as always, let me know in the comments which of these you are looking forward to the most next year. Are there any horror releases for next year that I forgot to list that you are looking forward to? I was having to cut things just to get the list down to 40. Eric LaRocca, I think, has 2 new collections coming out next year and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, wow. Anyway, if you enjoyed watching, as always, please hit that like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF and horror reading friends, and above all, please subscribe. If you have not done so, that is how the channel grows. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army occasionally get little perks, like early access to some of my videos, but mostly I use the Patreon money to pay Matt Olson, my brilliantly gifted, wonderful channel artist, for all of the great thumbnails and things that he does for me. So that additional help is appreciated. I don't really push the Patreon very much, but if you decide to kick in $2 a month, I am, of course, deeply grateful for that added help. I also want to thank all the rest of you guys for being the very best viewers in all of BookTube. Now, don't forget, anticipated 2024 fantasy, so be here. And so, until I see you then, and also tonight at the live reading stream, please join me for that. Stay safe and healthy, and spooky reading.